So it is 4:01. Let's get into this. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I'm going to stop presenting so you can actually see my ugly mug. I appreciate everyone's attendance today. Today is the first in a series of learning how to use G Suite scripting to do functional business activities. And specifically, that doesn't mean anything if you don't know what G Suite is. So we're going to start out with what is G Suite. G Suite stands for Google Suite. Google is obviously a mammoth computer company, and they have a productivity set of programs that are available through their accounts. There are two types of accounts you can have with Google. You can either have a free account, and you'll know it's a free account because in almost every single instance, it will end with @gmail.com. However, you can also have a private Google account, which is one that you usually have to pay Google to have, and it will have a domain name at the end of your email address. So for example, Family Support Council that I run has a private Google Suite setup. And so all of our @family-support.org services are hosted by Google. Now, Google offers a lot of things that people are fairly used to already. An example of that is Office type software. I'm sure everyone at some point or another has used Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel or PowerPoint. Well, all of those exist in the world of Google as well as Google Docs instead of Word, Google Sheets instead of Excel, and Google Presentations instead of PowerPoint. Now, that's very similar, and so it's helpful for people to understand that, but there are some things that are there's more advantages to having it hosted not on your local computer. On your local computer, if you walk away for the day and your computer shuts down for the night, your Excel sheet is not going to continue to calculate formulas. It's not going to continue to have the document available for someone else to look at. And in fact, it's very difficult to get Excel to be shared across the internet from one person to another using computers. So if I want to read, say, Mona's spreadsheet and it's based in Excel, it would take a lot of work for my computer to be able to read her computer's Excel spreadsheet. When the file is hosted by Google, that means it's hosted on Google servers, and it never goes to sleep for the day. It's always available. What that means is that the equivalent concept of an Excel document, a spreadsheet, can be available 24/7 worldwide because it's hosted by G Suite. Now, the concept of having this server, this Google server, hold all of your files has more advantages than simply being available anywhere. It also means that you literally have a computer set up at Google that can do things for you at any time. And an example of that is, what if I want to run my payroll program and I want it to run at Friday night at midnight so that first thing Saturday morning, I see all the payroll reports ready to go. If it was on my computer, I wouldn't be able to do that very easily without having my computer on 24/7 and set up a custom program on my computer. With the Google system, it can do that for you, whether you're there or whether you even think about it. So the G Suite's power is actually that it allows activities to go on without you paying attention to them. And welcome Gina and Nancy, it looks like. So I'm going to be presenting some things today, and the first thing we want to talk about is, okay, I'm hoping you're familiar with things like Google, Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, which translates into the Google Docs, Sheets, and Presentation. We're going to focus on how do we make something happen really fast? How do we actually do something useful with Google? And so you have to program that. And that might sound really scary if you've never done any computer programming, but that's why we're doing the class today. So Google allows what's called JavaScript programming. Now, JavaScript is a programming language. Oh, thank you, Dan. Dan says presentations are now slides. He's correct. So he got me off track too. JavaScript is a programming language, and you're familiar with programming languages even if you don't realize it. A good example of that is you look at a website on a daily basis, and that website is actually programmed in HTML language. The hypertext markup language is the code that drives that behind the scenes. And that can look really scary if you've ever looked at it. Well, on any page that you go to that has interactive materials, and a good example of that is anywhere where you see a pop-up menu, something drives on your website where you can click on it and it opens something else as well. That is almost in every single case run by JavaScript. JavaScript is the programming language that makes the internet do things and not just show information. So Google will understand JavaScript. So what we're going to do today is we're going to play with some JavaScript to build an online ordering system. Now, right now, with a lot of businesses shut down, it can be scary to do business online, but wouldn't it be nice if a restaurant had a way to take an order online? So today we're going to learn how to use JavaScript and Google to build an online menu to place orders. So that can be really scary. We're going to present, and let me show. We're going to bring up our menu. I built a sample menu. And that sample menu, as you can see, has various items on it. Make it a little bit bigger so you can see that. Hopefully you can see that. So if you'll notice at the top, there's only 3 columns to our menu. It says name, description, and price. Pretty simple for a menu. As you can imagine, it can be a little bit more complicated, but that's what we're going to start with. And thank you to the New York Public Library system for archiving menus where I can just steal this data from and use it for today's lesson. Welcome, Jana. So, hello. You can access this menu at any time through menu.family-support.org. Putting that in the chat window as well. And that allows you to make a copy of this file at any time. So menu.family-support.org. When you open that, you're going to want to go to File and make a copy. So we're going to make a copy of our sample menu. And that opens a new version of that file. Now, we want Google to take this data that is our online menu and make a way for customers to interact with it and tell us what they want to order. So we first need to create a JavaScript program, and that is as easy as going to Tools and Script Editor. Google does the work for you automatically to say there's going to be a program attached to that spreadsheet. What I need to decide is, first, it says untitled project, and I want to name it something. So we're going to name it the menu form. It doesn't really matter what you name it. So if you don't like what I name things, you can name it whatever you want. Now in here, you can see that it says function, my function, a couple of parentheses and brackets. This is the bare minimum required to be a valid JavaScript program. It doesn't actually do anything, but it tells the computer that you have a function or a program called my function. I don't like the name my function, So we're going to name that something else. I'm going to name it make my form. Now it's important that there are no spaces in that because spaces mean things. So don't leave spaces if you don't really mean to. Now the first thing we need to think about is I have our menu. We have all of our information in here. We have all these, we have 18 rows of items on our menu, and we need to somehow turn that into a form. So the first thing we need to do is get that information. So when I say get that information, we need to first define what the computer will think that information is. And we do that through two things in JavaScript. The first one is a variable. If you remember in math class, when you would have x plus 2 equals 5, the x would be the variable. You don't necessarily know what x is, but it could be, in this case, 3. And in that case, that variable is defined. So we're going to define first our variable. In JavaScript, you always define a variable using var, short for variable, which is fairly easy if you think about it. Plus, programmers are lazy, and we don't like to use a lot of letters if we don't have to. So we're going to first mention that we know that this script, this function, is attached to our menu. So we're going to say, and I'll make up a variable here. I'm going to name it SS. It doesn't matter what you name it. It could be full spreadsheet. It could be Larry. Doesn't matter. And we're going to call a special word called spreadsheet app. That is a Google function that allows us to reference a Google spreadsheet. After we call that app, the spreadsheet app, we need to put a period. Google makes this really easy if you don't know how to program, because as you put the period, it will launch a list of all the things you can do correctly after that. And a lot of them we're not going to need, but some of them we might. And the one we want right now is called Get Active Spreadsheet, because we know that the spreadsheet that is currently active is our menu that we've been working in. So we have our active spreadsheet named as a variable. Now the next step is we know that the menu is called SS. Fairly easy, and it's just short for spreadsheet. But I want the specific sheet that has the menu on it. In Google, you can have multiple sheets. See, down at the bottom, we have sheet 2, and we also have sheet 1. Well, sheet 1 is actually the one that has the menu in it. So we want to grab that sheet, not sheet number 2. So we're going to have to create another variable. And so we do that, and we can actually build variables off of other variables. So we're going to name this one sheet, and we're going to call it ss dot. And again, it gives us all the things we can do. We want to get that sheet. Well, the easiest way to do it is probably get sheet by name. And it conveniently pops up and it says, what name do you want it to be? So we're going to name it sheet 1 because that's what it's called. And I will tell you from experience, go down to the sheet you want, go to rename, and copy the name exactly as it is, and then go back and paste that into where you want it to be. Because if you've named your spreadsheet Mississippi and you can't quite spell it, you're going to have a hardship later. So our program now knows what spreadsheet to get, and it knows what sheet to get. We now need to get the range of information. We want all of the data. We want the food item, we want the descriptions, and we want the price. So we need to build what is called an array. I'm going to take a brief break here because an array is something really important to understand. And if you don't understand what an array is, you are going to not be able to do this. So I have a sample array. Now, an array is really just a table. Now in this case, you can see that I put a sample array available in Google Sheets, and it has a number of rows and it has a number of columns. The difference between an array and a table like you might have in Excel or even Google Sheets is that they have index numbers instead of column numbers or row numbers. The way to think about that is if I want to build an array that has a bunch of fruit in it, I'm going to start by using index 0, and I'm going to put in apple. And then I'm going to put in banana and pear and cherry. And then I'm going to go to the next line. And I'm going to put in the rest of my fruits, the grape, the mango, the orange, and the watermelon. Now, if you'll notice down at the bottom of the screen, it has those fruits listed in brackets so that it has one row contains apple, banana, pear, and cherry. Every array is always separated by commas, and it has a bracket around it. Then you have a second row called grape, mango, orange, watermelon, also in its own set of brackets with its own commas, and both rows are separated by a comma. Now, thinking about that, if I want the apple, I know that it's in row 0 and column 0. If I want the mango, I know it's row 1 and column 1. Well, what if I want to have one more fruit? I want to add a lemon in there. I want 9 fruits in my array. That's going to change things because now I need to put lemon down in my text version of that array. I'm going to type lemon down at the bottom. Now you'll notice that row 0 and column 4 is empty. If that is an empty space and the computer expects to find something there, it will absolutely error out. So we have to tell the computer we really meant for row 0, column 4 to be empty. And so we do that by including an empty space. Now, if you'll notice on row 0, down at the bottom, it says apple, banana, pear, cherry, and then double quotation marks with nothing in between them. That is the easiest possible way to tell the computer that there's nothing there. And so when I say spaces are important, if you put a space in there, it will believe that there's a space in between those quotations. If you want it to really be empty, you need to use nothing in there. Just put quotes around nothing. Okay, I'm going to go to the chat really quick, and I want to see how many people understand what an array is. Dan, what fruit is in array location 1, 3? Row 1, index 3, column. Or anyone, because Dan apparently isn't able to respond.
Watermelon.
Watermelon, there you are. Heidi, Melissa, Melanie all got it correctly. So if you can think about an array as simply a table, it will make everything much easier. Now, the big difference you'll notice is that computers don't start with 1. That's a human thing. Computers start with 0. So even though in Excel you would have a row 1, in an array you will have a row 0. In a Excel sheet you'll have a column A, but in JavaScript you will have a column 0. So knowing what an array is really important. When we go back to our menu, we have 19 rows total, and we have 3 columns total. The first row, name, description, and price, don't actually matter. And Melissa Schuler asked, do arrays always have a row 0? they always have a row 0. They do not always have a column 0, because if there's only one item in your array, you will have an item 0, but there's no second row, and so there's nothing to reference against that. So you have to have more than one item to have at least a column 0. Good question, Melissa. So in our menu, applesauce, we want that to actually be row 0, column 0, because we don't need the name, description, or price. We just want the information. So applesauce becomes 0, 0, and baked apples becomes 1, 0. With me so far? Great. Okay, let's go back to our script, and we're going to tell the script we want everything from applesauce to 888. And we do that by defining yet another variable, but this time we know that the variable is going to actually be an array. So we're going to call it our range, and we're going to build off what we had already done. So we know that it's located on the sheet, and we know that it's going to be get range, and conveniently it tells us what we can put in there. Well, we know that the row we want is actually row 2, so we put 2. We know that the column we want is 1, because obviously it's the first column. Now here's where we get tricky. The number of rows might be different depending on what is in my menu. So I need to tell it to first figure out how many rows are there in the area. So we're going to do that using a built-in trick that they provide us. We're going to put a set of parentheses, and we're going to type sheet, and then the period, get last row. Very convenient that Google will actually tell you what the last row is in that sheet. Now, we started on row 1, and it said the number of rows we want. So since we skipped row 1, we actually want to reduce that by 1, and not go over the area we're talking about. If I started on row 3, I would actually have to subtract 2. Today we're not going to. We're going to start on row 2, and we're going to subtract 1. The number of columns, we're going to do that exact same trick on, only we're going to tell it to get last column. And that one you can just leave as is because we started on column 1. Okay, so we have defined our range. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a way to look at that and understand that it really is grabbing the information? Again, Google wants us to succeed, so it's going to give us a way to do that called logger log. This is your best friend, because what we're going to do is tell it to log range. We have a complete program at this point. We have told it what spreadsheet we want to get. We've told it what sheet we want to get, sheet 1. And we've told it what range we want to get, which is from row 2 down to the very end. And then we told it to log that information. So let's go ahead and run it. When you run a function, you first have to save it. So first, we need to either go to the save icon or file and save. It's going to save it. The first thing you should notice is that up at the top, it now lists make my form as a function option. So we're going to go ahead and run that. You can either use the run icon, or you can run function make my form. When I click on this, the first thing it's going to do is make sure we're serious. And it does that by asking for permission to allow this to access my data. We don't want it to access data if it doesn't have permission. So we're going to review the permissions. I'm going to say, yes, I really am Steve Decker. And it's going to say, this permission will allow menu form to see, edit, create, and delete your spreadsheets in Google Drive. Make sure you trust menu form. If you don't trust menu form, you probably should not allow it. I built it, so I know it's safe. So I'm going to allow it. Clicking on allow, it will now run the function. It's a very small function, so it runs very fast, but now we can see the log. To do so, we're going to go view and logs. It will go and read what our program created. Range. So it saw the range. Now that's super helpful that it can see the range, right? Except wouldn't it be nice if we actually knew what was in the range? So we need to go back to our range variable, and we need to hit the period again to see what can we get from our range. And we know we want to get something. So when we go into the get areas, we can go down and see get values. Getting the values and running that same program will make the log very different, because instead of an array called range, it will now show the content of that range. In theory, once it wakes up. And there we are. So do you remember from our sample array where it had that strange bracket, information, another bracket, comma, bracket? Our log does that exact same thing. I'm not sure. Does that zoom in for all of you, I hope? You have, at this time, it ran the script, and we have bracket, and then applesauce, comma, the description, and then the end of that one, plus a comma to separate the row with our next row, so on and so forth. So we can see exactly what's in that range. So we know we have the right information. So far, so good. We can have our script read the information. Now, I don't need to log every single time. We know that we have the information correct. So I want it to not actually do anything next time. In order for that to be ignored, we use what's called commenting lines. And these tell the computer that that line of JavaScript is able to be ignored. So far, we're able to grab the information, we're able to log the information. Now we need to actually do something. So we're going to create a form. We're going to name our variable form. It doesn't need to be fancy. And we're going to call another special script called form app. And we're going to create a new form. And it's asking for a title here, and I think we'll keep it simple. We'll just call it menu. Again, it has to be in quotation marks if it's going to be text. Now, some of you may be wondering, how do I find all these crazy things that he's talking about? Because wouldn't it be nice if there was a representation of these items? Just highlight it and search for Google. And Google will immediately pull up with the Form App Developers page. And it has everything you can ever think of and ever want to know. Amy DeWitt Smith says, how does it know to represent the prices as currency versus regular numbers with decimals? It does not. If you look at the log, the numbers are just numbers for those prices. It doesn't know that they are currency because in Sheets is telling it that it's currency based on the format. The array just thinks it's a number. And it is just a number, and it will stay just a number unless we tell it to be turned into a price. So let's go ahead and go back to where we are in creating the form. We're going to create a helper text in our form, and we're going to call that help, because why not? And we're going to build off the previous variable, form dot. And this time we want to set a description for the form so people know what it is. And we're going to call that this time my menu form. Doesn't need to be fancy again. Now, what we've done at this point is we've gathered the information and we have created a form. We want to have items on the form that represent those food items. So to do that, we need to loop through each row. We need to go first through this row, then this row, then this row, and this row, and this row, 18 times until we've gone through all the food items. To build a loop, you're going to use the easiest loop. It's called a for loop. And you use a variable that you're going to call 0. Doesn't need to be valid for anything. And that value always needs to be less than how many items are in the array. Arrays have an index. If you remember the 0 row and 0 column, they also have a built-in length feature. And anytime you want to know how many items are in an array, you can hit the length. Now, because it's going off the entire array, it's going to count how many rows there are as opposed to how many columns. If you wanted to know the length of a row, you would have to ask on that specific row what the length is. And every time we go through the loop, we're going to add one more to the value of a, so that it starts out 0 and then becomes 1 and 2 and so on, 3 and 4 and so on, until it's hit 18 times. We first need to get the menu item. If you remember, the first menu item is applesauce. Our menu item then becomes range, and we want row number 0. So who can tell me through the chat box what index we want for applesauce? Anyone? Giving it away here. I need to show it. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's go back to our applesauce. Our range is this area, Dan. So if our range is that area and we want applesauce, which is the very first one, what number would applesauce be? 0, exactly, Heidi, correct. So we're going to get item row 0, item 0. And that's how we call applesauce. It's from the array called range, and it's index 0 row and index 0 column. Well, the problem is I want every single item. I don't want just applesauce. I want applesauce and baked apples with cream and baked potatoes and boiled eggs and everything. I want all of those, but I need to loop through, and I don't want to have to think about how do I type out, because if I could type it out that fast, I wouldn't need my spreadsheet and my script. So we go back to that variable we built. Remember how the first time it's going to equal 0, we're going to put row A. And what that does is every time it goes through, it's going to make that letter A equal whatever number this little mini function makes it meet. So we're going to do the same thing with the menu description and the menu price. I'm just going to paste those in so it's a little bit quicker. So our menu description is always going to be on the row, and it's going to be column index 1, because it's the second column. And the price is going to be column 2, because it's the third column in the sheet. Remember that it always starts on 0. So now we know that, and we want one last variable. When we think about how do we allow customers to order things, or when you go to order things online, it always asks you how many you want, right? So we need to build an array that is how many of whatever item you want to order. So we're going to declare one last variable, and it's our numbers. And it is literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have a variable that is an array, and we've declared our array using that same text method that we learned from our sample array. So a bracket plus the material on the inside, separated by commas, gives us an array of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There is no second row to our array of numbers, so we don't need to worry about that, which is super important because it can get very confusing if you try and manually build an array instead of building it in a spreadsheet app. So we have our menu item, our menu description, our price, and our numbers. Let's add to our form those items. So I'm going to make a variable item, and I need to add it to the form and add let's make this a list item. So add list item. Now, adding a list item is great, but we need to set the title. So let's set the title, and we're going to call that the menu item. So if I want the menu item to be there instead of title, I can call the variable that we just told was whatever is in that row it's working on in column 0. So menu item, and that is going to be, we should probably tell it that it's a $sign, right? And we also need to get the price so people know how much they're going to pay for that. And then we need to ask, I don't know, something simple. How many do you want? Obviously, I'm not a marketing genius here selling my menu items, but it's enough to let people understand. Now, the last thing I want to do is I also want people to read the description. So we're going to add the help text, similar to how we did on the form itself. We're going to add the help text, and that needs to be actually the menu description. Okay, so now we have a form item that adds a title plus the price, asks how many they want, and gives a description as the help text. We need to add choices so people can choose how many. So we need to set choice values. And those values, we're going to refer back to our array of numbers. So what we have in this one long line says that for every time it goes through how much A is worth, and A is always going to be worth less than the length, and it will go through and it will read these items, and for every single time it's going to create a list item, set the title to whatever the menu item is, the price, and how many, and then add a description, and then set the choice options of how many numbers. We should probably run it and see if it actually works. So let's go ahead and save it, and we'll run it. It's going to ask me for permissions again, because I added new things that it wants to do, which is create forms. So I still trust this script, so I'm going to allow it. It's going to run. And here in a moment, we should be able to see our form. While it's going there, we're going to open Google Drive, and we're going to find the form that it has created. So we go to Drive. Oops, I just refreshed for no reason. And right at the top, it has menu. And that is the form we just created, timestamped at 4:39, right when we ran it. When we open that form up, this is the edit view of the menu. But if you want, we can see what a customer might see. And your potential customer can now see that you have a menu online, and you can choose between 1 and 6 of those items to add to your order. I want 4 fried eggs, and I want rice cakes. Gotta have my rice cakes. Your customer now submits their order, and you have received your first order building your script. It goes into your responses, and you can see that it has already started to collect how many it wants. Now, there's a lot of fine points to think about. One of the things is Amy asked about the prices, and that these are just numbers. And here's a prime example. Brown potatoes are $3.5. Well, that's not super helpful to you if you want to make a menu. So that means we need to change our script a little bit to always indicate that it will have multiple digits after the decimal. So in order to do that, there's lots of different ways to do it, including just adding a 0 to the end. But the easiest is to use a tiny little script called a number formula. Let's see. Now, one of the unfortunate sides of doing all of these fun things is that JavaScript is far bigger than what Google shows you. And so there are a lot of things that exist that you have to actually Google in order to know how to do. And making numbers into fixed decimal points is one of those. So we're going to add something to our price that is from regular JavaScript called prefix2. I'm going to call this one menu2 to make sure everybody knows it's a different form than the first form created. And we're going to run it again. At this point, you have a completely functional way of making a Google form out of raw data and make it into a form. That form can then be used to do anything you need it to do. Well, menu 2 here. Now, as we look at our questions, our baked potatoes are really 450 and not 4.5. Our brown potatoes are really 350 and not 3.5. Okay. We have whipped through that really rough lesson in 45 minutes, knowing that it's recorded, so you're going to be able to look at it later and go through the lesson slower than I did. Now's when you can ask questions that you thought of as you went through this material. So you can either unmute yourself, knowing that you're going to be recorded, or use the chat box to ask any questions. I'll bring up our final form for view. Karen says, thankfully, you're recording it. Yes, because I know very well that I was going to go through this material very, very fast in order to fit it under an hour with time for questions. So I'm going to be putting the recording link out for everybody so you can learn from it. And don't forget that if you want to go and get a copy of the sample menu, it's at menu.family-support.org. There we are. There we are. Get back to the chat. Dan seems a little bit overwhelmed with what just happened. Amy DeWitt Smith, I need to practice, but my menu will be prettier. I'm sure your menu will be prettier. One of the points of this is not how to make this good marketing material for a business. That is a much later lesson. Right now, this is how do I, in under an hour, create an online data collection tool using data I may already have. A prime example of that is, of course, the menu example that we did. Another example is I have a paper document that is based on a spreadsheet or just information, and I want to turn it into a data collection. Adding it to a spreadsheet and running that script will create a data collection device. Another common item is I need to verify I have a receipt for every financial transaction out of my bank account. I can download my bank account information as a comma separated value and put it into Google Sheets. And from that, I can create a form that would allow me, instead of checking how many I want, simply checking off that it has been received. So when you go into forms, the content in there is driven by you. I created one that is a drop-down, a list item, but the reality is you can ask as many questions as you can think of including simple text answers. What do you want to do today? What do you think about such and such a topic? How are you doing this month? You can have a checkbox item or where they can select multiple answers, or a multi-choice or a multiple choice where there's only one possible answer. Karen says you're all hungry now. Did I break everyone's brains? I hope not. I'm going to stop presenting. We have about 14 minutes left. If anybody has any specific questions or examples you have in your mind of what you might like to use a data collection tool for. I can't unmute any of you, by the way. You're all muted, so I can't unmute. Melissa, what was the example you were going to use this for? You're muted. I still can't hear you. Karen says a sheet for available holidays or vacation times available. Absolutely. That is a prime example. You could set your holidays for the year or for a time period in advance, and then send the form out to employees to see when they want to, which one they want to call, or which ones they plan on taking vacation for. That's a perfect example, Karen, on what it could be used for. So Dan asked, can't I just use Google Forms? Dan, the short answer is, of course you can. The reality, though, is if you have a small set of information to collect data on, say, what do you want for lunch, it might not be worth the effort to use a script to collect that. On the other hand, what if you wanted to create a unique form for every single person in your organization, and you wanted it to be driven by data that is dynamic, so that the form is updated by that data, as opposed to being what you hand type into Google Forms? By using the script process, it can actually update the form live. And remember how I said the biggest power of Google Suite is that it can do things in the background all the time without ever needing to be told to do it or worried about whether or not it will run. Prime example is, what if your menu based which items were listed first on which items were most profitable at the time based on the cost of fruit or meat? What if your sales page listed information based on top sellers first, as opposed to what you decided to put in first? When you start to think about things in terms of scripted forms or scripted material, it can be dynamic and change as business changes. It's the same reason that many restaurants have to reprint their menus several times a year, because they know that the menu is going to drive the sales. How much better would it be if you could drive that on a daily basis, or literally on an hourly basis, based on customer orders of what's going, or based on what you need to sell? I need to sell 150 boots today. Well, I better put boots at the top of my online order system so that those boots go first. Hopefully that answers your question, Dan. Dan says yes. Very good. Amy, did we blow your mind today, or are you good at it? You're muted, so we can't hear you anyway. Yes, you will need to practice. The recording is going to go out, and you'll be able to pause this at the key points where I start typing things in. One of the links I'm going to send out to everyone right now is the home page to Google Script. It is the dictionary for everything. It's going out in the chat window right now. It's developers.google.com/apps-script. And it has links and reference for everything. One of the fun things it has are 5-minute samples. I don't necessarily encourage people to do those unless they actually meet a specific need, because they don't really teach you how to use them. They simply give you the information. If you want to learn more, a week from today, we're going to take that same menu program that we built today. We're going to build on it so that it is actually updated on the fly as customers place orders. That goes back to the concept of it being dynamic and action driven. We're also going to have it built so that it will email the customer the order that they just placed and give them a total so they can pay when they show up to pick up their food. Okay, I think that's enough for today, unless there's any other burning questions. All right. Thank you very much, guys. You're very welcome. I'm glad I was able to, and hopefully people know they can share the recording after today and help other people and other organizations that need this help.